Thanks for joining us. I sought the Lord, and He answered me and delivered me from every fear. Those who look on Him are radiant. They'll never be ashamed. They'll never be ashamed. Well, this poor man cried, and the Lord heard me and saved me from my enemy. The Son of God surrounds His saints. He will deliver them. He will deliver them. So magnify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name together. Glorify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name forever. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, blessed are they who hide in Him. Oh, fear the Lord, all of you saints. He'll give you everything. He'll give you everything. So magnify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name together. Glorify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name forever. Let us bless the Lord every day and night. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord every day and night. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord every day and night. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord every day and night. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Magnify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name together. Glorify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name forever. Magnify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name together. Glorify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name forever.
Good morning, River Church community. I'm so glad you could join us for our live stream this morning. Let me just ask you a question. What is your fast food guilty pleasure? What do you eat when you're alone, no one's looking, and then you dispose of the trash or the evidence discreetly so that your spouse or your housemates or your kids, whoever it is, don't see? Is it McDonald's? Is it Taco Bell? I had someone tell me recently that Taco Bell used to be their fast food guilty pleasure until one day they got a taco that had a really long hair in it, and since then they have not been able to eat Taco Bell. And isn't that how it always goes? You have a bad experience at a restaurant, and if it's a chain, it affects your perception of all the other restaurants, even if it's in the same city, and maybe you never go back. And that doesn't just go for restaurants, that's the same with retail stores and maybe even church. Isn't that true for church, that when someone has a painful experience within church or with Christians, it affects their perception and their ability to connect in other churches and with other Christians? And very understandably so, because they need time to process, to grieve, to rebuild trust, and maybe they never go back. And that's the reality. Like, the reality is, throughout history, the church has not always been an authentic representation of who Jesus is and God's love. The church has caused damage, done trauma to people, to different groups of people. And right now we're going through the series, finishing up the book of Acts, talking about what does it mean to be witnesses of who Jesus is? What are the characteristics of our witness as followers of Jesus? And what's really interesting is in the book of Acts, the followers of Jesus, the people who are following the resurrected way of Jesus, are living in a time where it was very risky and vulnerable to be a follower of Jesus or to talk about Jesus. They were being persecuted. And while the kind of vulnerability that they're living in is different than ours, we are not being persecuted, there is certainly things that we can learn from them. And it's true that it's a vulnerable time to be a follower of Jesus. I know that many of us even feel like once we confess to someone that we're a Christian or a follower of Jesus, we have to follow up with all these disclaimers, like explaining that, well, we're a Christian, but not like this, and this is what that really means, because there are all these different perception and negative experiences of Christians and church, right? So even though the early church was living into a different kind of vulnerability, there's still much that we can glean and learn from them about what does it mean to be a witness of who Jesus is and to share Jesus's good news in a time where that's risky and vulnerable. Let me say a prayer for us and then we'll dive into the text. God, would you just come to us this morning and remind us of your goodness? Would you remind us of the vulnerability that you lived into as you were the most authentic representation of God's love? We pray these things in your name. Amen. So we're going to be in Acts chapter 22, but let me give you a little bit of context. So Paul, who has been traveling around planting churches, is now being led by God's Spirit to go to Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, there are Jews who are now following the resurrected Jesus. They are joining this community that is becoming known as Christians. See, when Paul was going around planting churches, he didn't really think that he was starting a new religion. But in following the resurrected Jesus, who was fulfilling the Jewish laws and customs, it causes conflict. And there's persecution. They have conflicting views about what it means to be right with God. What does it mean to be saved? So when Paul arrives in Jerusalem, there are some Jews who are now following the resurrected Jesus that come to him and say, look, Paul, you have to know what people are saying about you. Like they're saying that you're trying to tell us to abandon all of our customs and abandon the way of Moses to not be circumcised. So there's all these rumors that are spreading about Paul, and I'll talk more about this later. But Paul goes out and he's in front of the temple, and these people all swarm around him, and there's all this commotion, and they say, "This is the man who teaches everyone everywhere against our people and our law in this place." So people get really upset, and they drag Paul into the temple, and Roman troops come in to see what all the commotion is about. And Paul is about to be arrested. And now he's going to stand up and address the crowd. So that's where we're picking up in chapter 22, starting with verse 1. Paul says, "Brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense." When they heard him speak to them in Aramaic, they became very quiet. Then Paul said, "I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in the city. I studied under Gamaliel, and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison, as the high priest and all the councils can themselves testify. I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus, and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. About noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?' 'Who are you, Lord?' I asked. 'I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting,' he replied. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. 'What shall I do, Lord?' I asked. 'Get up,' the Lord said, 'and go into Damascus. There you will be told all that you have been assigned to do.' My companions led me by the hand into Damascus because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. A man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, 'Brother Saul, receive your sight.' And at that very moment, I was able to see him. Then he said, 'The God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all the people of what you have seen and heard. And now what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, wash your sins away, calling on his name.' When I returned to Jerusalem and was praying at the temple, I fell into a trance and saw the Lord speaking to me. 'Quick,' he said, 'leave Jerusalem immediately because the people here will not accept your testimony about me.' 'Lord,' I replied, 'these people know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him.' Then the Lord said to me, 'Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles.' The crowd listened to Paul until he said this. Then they raised their voices and shouted, 'Rid the earth of him! He is not fit to live.'" All right. So Paul gets up in front of this angry crowd that is so worked up and shares the story. He's a witness and sharing to what God has done. And I want to take a moment to pull back some of the layers of vulnerability in what Paul does. Because especially if you've grown up in the church and you're familiar with Paul's story, it's easy just to read through this and say, yeah, this is Paul's conversion story. But there are layers of vulnerability here. First, Paul gets up and shares a story that doesn't make him look good. It makes God look good. The story that Paul shares does not make him look good. He essentially gets up and says, "Listen to the horrible things that I've done. I had my hand in killing a person. I was wrong." Think about how hard it is to admit when we're wrong. I was wrong. I thought I was right. I was doing all these things. I was like you, and then I was blind. And this is what God showed me. God called me to use me to spread the good news about Jesus. I want you to imagine for a second filling out a resume with all the worst things that you've ever done. Would you ever do that? No. We don't often lead with our mistakes or our weaknesses. In an interview, when we are asked, what are some of your weaknesses? We often go the Michael Scott route. I work too hard, I care too much, and I'm too invested in my job, right? We don't actually share the worst things that we've ever done or our weakness, but here, the story that Paul shares does not make him look good. It makes God look good. Number 2, the story that Paul shares connects with the people, but it also confronts. Paul speaks to them in their language, so they listen. Paul says, look, I was just like you. He speaks with humility. He's connecting with them. But the story also confronts. It's not like Paul gets up and says, hey, look, you're wrong. Let me tell you what is right. But the story itself confronts. When he says that God sent me to the Gentiles, that is challenging their worldview. Paul is challenging what it means for them to be right with God and who can be a part of God's family. I had a friend who was telling me recently that some decade ago, her and her husband felt called to live within the neighborhood that their church existed in and was ministering in. And now they have 4 kids, and it's not a huge house, and people often ask them, why have you chosen to stay in this house, in this neighborhood? And they share their story, that God put it on their heart to stay there, that they're witnesses, that God is doing something through them in the lives of their neighbors, and that they love the community that they live in. And while in telling their story, they're not saying to other people, you're wrong if you choose to move to another neighborhood or if you go and buy another house. In telling their story, they are confronting another worldview, though. The view that you have a starter house and then you go and get the bigger house and every one of your children need their own room and these different worldviews. Paul's story connects, but it also confronts, and in that way, it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable to challenge other people's worldviews. Paul's story and the way that he tells it is also vulnerable because he does not know how this story is going to be received. At this point, Paul is being accused of things that aren't exactly true. There were these rumors swirling around that Paul was telling people to abandon all their customs, to abandon the laws of Moses, to stop circumcision. And what Paul was really saying was actually, you can be a part of God's family if you're not circumcised. Rumors were swirling around. People were building a case against them. Their anger and thoughts were ruminating about how Paul was challenging what they knew to be right. And Paul is speaking to a group of people who have gone through significant trauma, who know what it's like to be occupied by other powers and nations, to have other powers and nations try to eliminate them, to occupy their land, something central to their identity, to strip them of their customs. Paul is speaking to a group of people who have known what it's like to be ruled by other political parties, challenging their culture and customs. Paul gets up and speaks with vulnerability. And in this kind of situation, doesn't it leave you wondering a little bit, like, why people even listen to Paul at all? And I find it quite compelling that Paul gets up and he doesn't have this well thought out, consistent argument with no holes. He doesn't have a compelling sales pitch. He has a story. He has a story that connects and challenges, and he shares it with grace and humility. And I could take some time to get into the power of story, of neurocoupling, and what exactly happens in our brains when we hear a story. But I think you all know what it's like to get caught up in a good story. To waste hours in a book or an entire day on a Netflix binge because you have to find out what happens next. I had a seminary professor who said the best evidence for faith is not a consistent logical system, but a compelling, authentic portrayal of something worth believing. How do we follow in the footsteps of Paul? Stepping into vulnerability as witnesses to who Jesus is, telling stories of what he's done in our life. How do we actually tell the story? Someone recently asked me if I have like a presentation of the good news of Jesus, kind of like a little summary that I tell whenever someone is interested in knowing about Jesus. And the truth is that I don't. I don't really have something that I pull on because a while ago I was introduced into this framework that I have found really helpful. It's something that Youth for Christ uses, an organization, a Christian organization that works with teenagers. And it's this Venn diagram that points to a space in which your story, another person's story, and God's story overlap. It's the idea that there's something that God has done in my life or is doing that will connect with this other person's story that maybe they need God to do in their life, or maybe God is already doing, but they can't see it. I knew someone who was living as a foreigner in another country. They were from the US, but they were living somewhere else. And they met this person who was also living in that country, but from another country. We'll say her name is Mary. And Mary had told them just how difficult this transition was for her. That it was lonely, that it was hard, that she expected life in this new country to be better for her, and it wasn't. And Mary also shared that she wasn't exactly a Christian. And so one day the door opened, the opportunity arose for this person to talk to Mary about what Christian community has meant to them, especially in a different country when they didn't know a lot of people and when they went through some challenging things. Do you see the ways in which this person's story connected with Mary's story and connected with God's story? I think that's a helpful way to think about how exactly could we share stories of what God has done in our life. I worked at In-N-Out for about 7 years. I got hired in high school and worked throughout college. And people would often ask me if In-N-Out really lived up to their standards of quality because they have such high standards. And it always felt so good to be able to say, yeah, you know what? The meat is never frozen. We're peeling potatoes all throughout the day that are used that day. I've never seen anyone spit in their burger. And I was able to share that because I had the experience and I had those stories. And the truth is, to be authentic witnesses of Jesus, we need the stories. We need to do life with Jesus, to commune with him, to listen to him, to have those experiences in order to be the witness. And what was also really interesting is when I worked at In-N-Out, you couldn't take your uniform home. They didn't want you wearing it outside of work anywhere because they were worried that someone might wear their uniform, the In-N-Out logo, doing something that didn't make the company look good. They were really considerate of their reputation. And so as we think about what does it mean to be authentic witnesses, Jesus is authentic witness, especially during a time where that is vulnerable and risky. We look and pursue God, and we have those experiences and stories, and also we hold ourselves to a standard of grace, but examine the ways in which we may or may not be witnessing to who Jesus is in our words and deeds. Does that make sense? Like, with a standard of grace, we examine our lives and we recognize that we are Jesus's ambassadors. And when people experience us, they are making connections to who Jesus is. And I don't say that with any kind of guilt or shame, but just an invitation to be transparent and examine and think about what kind of witnesses we're portraying to the world. Today and later this week, I invite you just to take some time thinking about, what is God doing in your life? What is the God story that you want to tell? And is there someone in your life who might need to hear that story? Let me say a prayer for us. God, thank you for the work that you're always doing around us and through us. And we recognize that we aren't perfect, and you have grace upon grace for us. And we want to be representations of your love because we have experienced it and we know it to be so good. So we pray that your Holy Spirit would come and refine us, that we could be more authentic representations of who you are. We pray these things in your name. Amen.
days. Holy God, show your sacred face, speak your heart, like in ancient days. Spirit, come. Holy Spirit, come. Spirit, come. Visit with us. Come to us, speak to us, move through us, be with us, move through us like you did in ancient days. Restore us, repair us. Your love and grace can do this. Spread the word, spread the word. Ancient of days. Now the darkness fades into new beginnings as we lift our eyes to a hope beyond. All creation waits with an expectation to declare the reign of the Lord our God. We will not be moved when the earth gives way. Overcome, and for every fear there's an empty grave. For the risen one is overcome. Now the silence breaks in the name of Jesus as the heavens cry, let the earth respond. All creation shines with a voice of triumph to declare the reign of the Lord our God. And we will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one is overcome. And for every fear there's an empty grave. For the risen one is overcome. He shall reign forever strong. now surrender for the Lord. Our God has overcome. Who can be against us? Jesus, our defender. He is Lord and He is overcome. He shall reign forever. Strongholds now surrender for the Lord. Our God has overcome. Who can be against us? Jesus, our defender. He is Lord and He has overcome. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one has overcome. And for every fear there's an empty grave, for the risen one has overcome. And we will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one has overcome. And for every fear there's an empty grave, for the risen one has overcome.
Let me send you with this blessing. To God be the glory, and to the earth peace. And to you, River Church community, courage. Courage to share the good news of Jesus and His great love and grace that you have experienced. And may the love and grace of Jesus Christ be with you now and forever. Amen.